The sky was on fire and I was falling through it, which is honestly not the worst Monday I've had. The city below looked like a mountain range made of hive blocks, a billion windows blinking distress in Morse code. I pinwheeled through smoke, bounced off a statue of a stern guy pointing at a brighter future that had clearly missed his appointment, and crunched into a marble plinth hard enough to rearrange my internal furniture. Ribs cracked, lungs hissed, vision popped, and then the familiar needle and thread sensation zipped everything back together. Hello, healing factor, my rude, codependent friend. Bolter fire raked the avenue. Green shapes burst from the fog. Orcs, all teeth and joy, roaring like engines that had discovered feelings. Across from them, soldiers in drab fatigues hunkered behind barricades and fired red lances of light. On a ruined stairwell, a woman in black and red power armor stood with a flamethrower and an expression that could sterilize an operating theater. "Repent," she cried, and a tide of flame washed the street clean of laughter. I hopped off the busted statue and tried a friendly wave. "Hi, I think I took a wrong turn at Albuquerque." The orc nearest me grinned like a broken bottle. "Oi, pajama boy." He swung an axe. I ducked. His blade took the stern statue's kneecap. The statue collapsed onto him and we both learned a lesson about hubris. I spun my katana once, twice, just long enough to pretend I'd meant to land here, and cut the strap of his chest rig. He staggered back, surprised his clothes had betrayed him. Story of my life. "Identify yourself." The flamethrower lady barked, advancing with enough righteous heat to toast marshmallows on Mars. "Deadpool," I said, presenting jazz hands. "Merc with a mouth. Frequent flyer of bad decisions. You. Sister Superior Seraphine of the Order of Our Martyred Lady. If you are a heretic, I will burn you. If you are a demon, I will burn you. If you are neither, I will burn you should circumstances require. Love clear boundaries." More orcs poured from the smoke. We moved together without discussing it. She drew a firewall with her flamer. I bounced off chunks of broken shrine and ribbed masonry and ribbed orcs. Somebody hit me with a hammer the size of regret. I fell down. I stood up. The hammer guy stared. Seraphine's eyes narrowed. The street learned a new definition of awkward silence. Thunder cracked overhead. A gunship dug a trench through the smoke and came down on jets of blue fire. Black-cloaked figures strode from the ramp, hats wide, mouths thin, every motion saying paperwork and punishments in equal measure. The one in the middle had a face like a razor stored in a freezer. "Inquisitor Valen," Seraphine said, and the rest of the world adopted his gravity. He took in the butchered orcs, the burning reliquary me. "What," he said, "is that?" I raised a hand. "Tourist." They shot me. I got better. We tacitly agreed to revisit the shooting thing later. By nightfall, I was manacled to a steel chair in a room built by a religion that really loved corners. Valen asked questions, precise and patient. I answered with jokes until the tech priest brought out a saw that sang hymns. We conducted several unpleasant science experiments. My body resembled a band poster at the end of a tour. His notes resembled a manual for a machine that hated you personally. "You cannot be executed," he said at last, and if he sounded disappointed, I'm sure that was my imagination. "See, we've already found common ground. My HR file says the same. Then you can be useful." He slid a data slate in front of me. An image flickered, a world of smokestacks and furnaces, a planet-sized factory playing organ music in a minor key. Forge World Helion. The Adeptus Mechanicus reports the theft of a relic, an experimental null engine. If activated, it deadens the warp across a wide radius. Communication ends. Travel fails. Psychers become deaf and blind. Chaos grows bold in silence. We believe an orc war boss intends to use it. We require retrieval. You will go. "Because I bounce," I said. "Because you survive," he said, and the space between those words filled with threats he didn't have to voice. I asked for a cloak and a partner. He refused the cloak. The door opened and the partner walked in, helmet under one arm, flamer holstered, eyes steady as iron nails. Seraphine, reassigned to observe me, which is Inquisition for babysit with extreme prejudice. We rode a void ship to Helen. the stars slipping past like guilty thoughts. The gun cutter cracked atmosphere into a throat of iron pipes, and we rattled along a canyon of cables toward a cathedral factory complex. The smells were hot metal, machine oil, soot, and something sweetly rotten, like regret simmering in a pan. Our guide was a Scutarius, augmented soldier of the priesthood. Designation 7 Theta Rho. He had a rifle long as a coffin and the bedside manner of a toaster. Target zone ahead. Orcoid infestation. Significant. Hairtech presence, likely. Hairtech. Renegade Mechanicus. Seraphine murmured. They tinker where no one should. So engineers, I said, and she pretended not to smirk. The null engine hung above the factory floor like a black heart suspended in a ribcage of catwalks. Around it swarmed orcs, banging, wrenching, adding spikes to things that didn't need spikes. A robed figure whispered to their warboss, a towering slab of swagger wearing a cape made of tires. The engine's presence pressed on the air like a held breath. Sound went thin and brittle near it, as if the world were bracing for a punch. We took the maintenance route. We made it 3 corridors before a grot decided the alarm looked edible. Sirens shrieked. Subtlety died as it lived. Briefly and loudly. Seraphine moved like a prayer with elbows. I moved like a bad idea with great cardio. 7 Theta Rho clicked shots from impossible angles, each round a comma placed where an orc had been shouting an exclamation point. We burst onto a gantry facing the null engine and were greeted by the whir of rotating blades between us and it. Great big Julian Urbane blade turbines. Orcs dared each other to hop carts through. The spikes they mounted the winners' hats on told a story with a sad ending. Disable from the core, crackled our toaster friend. Psyches suppressed. Rights ineffective. How do we get there? Hit the heart. The blades accelerated. A mech boy hammered the control column with a wrench until it obeyed his truth. If it moves, hit it. If it stops, hit it harder. I didn't think about it. Thinking is bad for my brand. Cover me, I said, and jumped into the blades. You know that moment when the ocean takes you and the world becomes bubbles and pressure and stupid decisions? Now imagine the ocean is knives. I folded around the black module the way lead folds around a slug. The blades obliged by solving the inconvenient attachment problems. I came out the other side smelling like a butcher shop that specialized in me, clutching the null heart. My healing factor played one of those frenetic xylophone pieces while the rest of me negotiated a body-wide ceasefire. The war boss bellowed and pointed. The world moved toward us with intent. Seraphine hammered a path open with bursts of fire. 7 Theta Rho shots chopping cables so the gantries fell like angry bridges behind us, and we sprinted for the maintenance door. The gun cutter lifted on a cough and a curse, took several bullets meant for bigger vehicles, and clawed its way toward the clouds. I dropped the heart into a reliquary case and buckled in. That's when the whisper started. At first it was just the sense of a hymn hummed 2 rooms away. Then it was a voice I couldn't place, the kind you trust before you remember not to. Wade, it said calmly, like we were meeting for coffee. Wade Wilson. You are a wound that never closes. Let me close you. No solicitors, I said aloud. Seraphine's helmeted head tilted. What? Brain spam. The voice smiled inside me. I can make it quiet. There are temptations that wear red dresses and temptations that wear white coats. Quiet wore neither. Quiet was the promise of unclenching muscles I didn't know I'd tightened. It was the mercy of not having a bar fight in my skull every hour. For a second I imagined it. Nothing scratching at the edges, no static, no wrongness that wasn't funny no matter how often I joked about it. Seraphine unsealed her helm and leaned close until the burn scars on her cheek were constellations. Do not bargain with the warp, she said, as if she could see the thought crossing my face like a dark cloud. Who says it's the warp? I tried a grin. It looked tired in the viewport's reflection. Maybe it's the friendly local appliance store. Please, the voice breathed. A door. Open me. Yeah, see, that's not a comforting sentence. Our cutter shuddered hard enough to kick the conversation into the next paragraph. Boarding spikes slammed through the hull with a nightmare satisfaction. Cables reeled us toward a ship that looked like a cathedral had decided to get into knife sails. Glyphs crawled across its hull like cancers that had learned calligraphy. The hatch groaned in, and the figure that stepped through wore crimson and brass and inevitability. His armor was a shrine to bad decisions held together by chains that squirmed. The helmet's grill breathed contempt. Trader Astartes, a Chaos Space Marine, filled the cabin like the idea of failure. Little lambs, the Vox rumbled. Bring me the heart. I moved because I was afraid, and muscles don't like admitting it. My left katana screeched across his armor. My right arm separated at the elbow. I fell in half. Seraphine stepped in with a creed and a burst of fire and got a backhand that dented her breastplate. 7 Theta Rho shot the Marine in the eye lenses twice, which made him angrier and redder, but not deader. Wade, the voice said, steady under the carnage. Choose. There's a kind of decision you don't make with your brain. You make it with whatever organ is left after your brain and your heart give each other bad advice. I grabbed the reliquary, felt the null heart cold as a verdict under my fingers, and let it crawl up my arms like frost. The world snapped to grayscale. Sound went thin and far away. The chains on the Marine's armor writhed once and died. The air stopped tasting of pennies and started tasting of nothing. The warp blinked and found there was no room for it here, not for a handful of seconds. Psyker. He snarled, staggered. Opposite, I said. I'm the off switch. Seraphine didn't waste the moment. She holstered the flamer, useless without warp kiss, and drew a bolt pistol. 7 Theta Rho planted around in the helmet joint. I slashed tendons that shouldn't exist. The Marine toppled like a fallen bell and hit the deck with a sound that taught the ship about gravity. The second the null bubble collapsed, the boarding harpoons convulsed as if offended by existence. Our pilot, a woman who swore in 3 liturgies, punched the throttle and tore free. The chaos ship dwindled behind us like a bad idea receding, which is the only good thing bad ideas do. I slumped against the wall and laughed because everything hurt and because I was happy to still have a throat. Seraphine pressed a gauntlet hand to my shoulder and squeezed once. Steady pressure, battlefield kindness. No words. She didn't need them. Back on the Inquisition cruiser, Valen studied the null heart like it was a sin he could use. You attuned to it, he said, and awe sounded weird in his voice. Briefly. We didn't exchange rings, I said. We're taking it slow. With measured deployment, he said. This engine could win sieges, cripple sorcery, preserve worlds. Or doom them should it fall again. Ah, weaponized responsibility. My favorite genre. He informed me, formally, that I would continue to serve the Ordo Xenos. Informally. If I ran, the places I liked to eat would experience unfortunate orbital accidents. I told him I was flattered, and I meant it, because it seemed safer to mean things around him than to fake them. He left with the heart escorted by 6 servoskulls and a psalm about humility. Seraphine lingered. For someone whose hobby was fire, she could be very gentle in the spaces between things. When it spoke to you, she said. What did it offer? Quiet, I said. She studied my mask like she was reading a book through a keyhole. You are not broken, she said at length. You are, how the Emperor made you, in a universe that makes unmaking a habit. Somewhere deep in the ship, engines changed pitch. Somewhere farther, a starship died with dignity and people turned the lights off behind them. I looked at Seraphine, at the furnace-colored reflection of the viewport in her eyes, and I believed her for maybe 6 seconds. It was a good 6 seconds. We didn't get a break. The 41st millennium is allergic to breaks. We were dropped into wars that had been happening for centuries and expected to tidy up. On a pilgrim ship, we cut down a cult before the air went thin and carried a crying child to a lifeboat, and she called Seraphine Saint in the voice kids have when they're trying to be brave. On a dead moon, we surfed a collapsing hablock across a lake of promethium because that was the least stupid plan available, and later Seraphine laughed with her helmet off and it sounded like a bell rung in an empty church. On a forge world that wasn't Hellion, the Mechanicus tried to X-ray my soul, and I told them to take a number because my soul was busy. On a snow planet, a chaos sorcerer tried to bargain with me by offering a fixed mind in exchange for 50,000 lives. I told him I was willing to negotiate down to 5. He didn't get the joke. He exploded. Sometimes, late in corridors that hummed with righteous purpose and recycled air, the null heart whispered from its vault, "I can make it quiet, Wade." I would lean on the wall and breathe the ship's heartbeat and say, "Not today." Then I would find Seraphine in the chapel, and we would sit side by side, and I would not say anything, and neither would she, and somehow that was its own kind of quiet. Valen called me to a range one day and watched me empty a bolter at a silhouette shaped like trouble. "You remain anathema to the Imperium," he said, like a man reading weather reports from inside a storm. "Yet you keep me around. It's my winning smile." He didn't smile back. Reports indicate a black crusade may be mustering in the eye. If it comes, there will be no quiet left anywhere. "Lucky you," I said, reloading. "I'm loud." He left. I put one more bolt through the paper Chaos Marine's respirator grill and imagined it coughing, just once. "We got a transmission from a world I can't name because someone will redact this in red ink so thick it drips. Orcs, cults, things that learn to walk in the warp before they learn to crawl. A bad mix." Valen gave us the brief in 12 clipped lines. Drop. Secure. Survive if convenient. Seraphine made the sign of the Aquila, a gesture that somehow lightened the room. On the descent, the gun cutter rattled like a tambourine with anxiety. The city below glowed the color of furnaces and stubborn sunsets. I checked my blades, the borrowed bolter, the grenades labeled in a language that mostly translated to, "Please stand back." I checked the little prayer card tucked under a strap, Saint Mina looking annoyed at evil. I checked the place the null heart's offer lived in me, a coin I refused to spend. The ramp dropped. Heat hit like applause. Orcs roared. Cultists sang. Somewhere, something with too many teeth smiled at the thought of all this noise. I grinned right back because this is what I am good at. Being the loudest wrong answer in a universe of terrible questions. Seraphine touched her helm to mine, a soft clink of steel on steel, and said, "Try not to die." "I make no promises," I said, and leapt. We hit the street as a wave of green slammed into a wall of faith and lost fire. The city became a drumline, bolters thudding, chains words buzzing, the high whistle of artillery like a kettle someone forgot on the stove. I carved space, she held it, and between us a little island of living refused to drown. Somebody screamed praise to emperors or devils. Someone else laughed because they'd forgotten how not to. A Chaos Marine crashed through a hab bulkhead ahead of us, red as old blood and twice as angry. He lifted a power fist and the air bent around it. Seraphine shouted a warning that I didn't have time to absorb. The fist came down and the world had room for one less me. Then there were two of me again, then one, then most of one. "Wade." Seraphine's voice cut through the battle like a thrown rope. I grabbed it just by hearing it. The Marine drew back for another end of sentence. I threw a grenade into the joint of his armor and a joke into his face. The grenade went off. The joke landed. He hesitated for the length of a laugh, and in that sliver Seraphine put a bolt round through the grill. The Marine fell with the specific dignity of heavy things. We moved on because in this universe moving on is the only verb that counts. The fight stretched. The sun fell over a skyline of chimneys and cranes. The city smelled of promethium and courage and fear, which you learn to tell apart by taste. Somewhere an inquisitorial vox barked a code that meant exterminatus hung over us like a moon. Somewhere 7 Theta Rho whispered to his rifle as if it had nerves. Somewhere the null heart sang to me again and I drowned it out by humming off key because sometimes the only weapon you have left is ridiculousness. When the long night finally uncurled, there were fewer buildings and more sky. We were scraped raw and still breathing. The tide had broken and rolled back, leaving behind wreckage that would sprout stories in a century. Seraphine stood beside me on the carcass of a ruined hab and watched the ash float. Her armor was scorched, her voice ragged, her eyes very alive. "You jumped in front of that child," she said quietly, as if catching up to the moment hours after. "He had incredible hair," I said. "Would have been a shame." "You infuriate me," she said. "I'm consistent," I said. She looked like she might smile and chose not to. That was fine. We had time to practice later, or we didn't. People say in the grim darkness of the far future there is only war, but sometimes there is also after, and the after is made of choices like staying when you could run, and jokes that land when nothing else does, and someone steadying your shoulder in a ship's humming corridor. The orders came down. Another world. Another problem. No quiet on the docket. I strapped in, checked my gear, and did not listen when the heart in the vault tried my name like a key. The ramp lowered. Heat breathed. The universe leaned in, waiting to see if we would blink. "All right, 41st millennium," I said, and my mouth curled wide behind the mask. "Let's be loud."